Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Welcome back to Paradise After Dark.
Dark.
I'm Lauren.
I'm Ken.
And we're back. It's been a bit.
Yeah, it's been a little while. Sorry.
Yeah. Sorry about that. We actually moved our entire podcast studio from upstairs to downstairs. So we got some new digs here.
We're isolated in a little room. And
Yes.
she's got me chained into a corner.
Well, we don't talk about that.
Oh, we don't? Okay.
No. It's cold in here, though.
It is.
It was hot upstairs. Now we're freezing. I'm wearing a sweater in August.
I'm wearing socks. I mean, I have other clothes on, but I'm wearing socks, too.
We have beers.
Yeah, this episode is sponsored by Mick Ultra. Not because they're paying us for it, but because we're drinking it.
All right. What are we talking about tonight, Ken?
Tonight about something that happened in 1985 that a lot of people might be familiar with. One thing I can say about this case is when I moved here in 87, I remember being in Mrs. Cantor's history class. Actually, it was Florida history.
They had Florida history class?
It was called Florida history. It was 6th grade at Golden Gate Mental School. And middle. I meant middle. But no, and I remember it was 1987, and this case was really, really hot at the time. That was like one of the first things I heard about. Did you ever hear about this? And she actually spoke about it in the class. So that was when I first heard about this case, and that goes back to 87, which, I mean, the case was still fresh at the time.
I actually didn't hear about this case until I was an adult. I was 2 years old when this happened, so.
Sweet Jesus.
But, you know, I actually was talking to my mom about it the other day. I asked her about it, and she was telling me how it was really something back then, 1985, and it was national news. They had People magazine, I believe, was there, and
tons of magazines. Washington Post.
Yeah, the LA Times.
Yeah, it was huge.
It was a huge deal.
Well, I mean, these people were very wealthy people, so, you know, I mean, as we're going to get into here in a little while, so when that kind of stuff happens, you're going to have news sources coming along wanting to report because it's news. And in 1985, people in the news wanted to report the news. You know, it wasn't about trying to be first. It was about trying to be, you know, part of it and be accurate. You know, I mean, obviously being first is always the key, but nowadays it's people are concerned with being first with the news, whether it's right or wrong.
Even if it's true or not.
Exactly, just be first.
Fake news.
Fake news.
So,
well, the good news is we're not fake news.
Since
we're just old news.
Have memories of that time. You have memories of that time wherein I was just a little toddler. And I don't remember what Naples was like at that point. Maybe you can fill us in on... set the scene. What was Naples, Florida like in 1985?
Well, this happened July 9th of 1985. At the time, Naples... I guess, you know, when you picture 1985 in Naples, I picture sandy beaches. I mean, because I came from in Indiana when I first moved down here. It was... You know, I mean, it was just that's the whole thought was just Florida was the beaches and, you know, like we talked about before, everyone thinks of Florida, they think beaches and high rises and condos and spring break, where now where we live, it's palmetto bushes and bears and, you know, and
alligators,
exactly,
and mosquitoes,
and loud parties and things like that, which is all
rednecks.
Cool. Hey, don't hate. But anyway, so at that time though, in the 80s, Naples kind of boasted itself as the Palm Beach of the Gulf Coast. So they were trying to get people to come. They were trying to reach out. I mean, you got some people from the East Coast that came to Naples, but for the most part, the big draw was sort of the upper class from the Midwest. They sort of, you know, they were kind of preying on the affluent retirees, wanting, hey, come to Florida, you know, because that's what you do when you're trying to build, you know,
well, whatever they were doing worked.
Boy, it
sure
did.
Naples, Florida now is...
Well, if anyone knows, if you go back to, well, actually it's still there, really, at 951 and 41, is it 951? Yeah, 951 and 41, Collier Boulevard for newbies. the Burger King that was there used to be the only Burger King that was actually was the only fast food restaurant at that end of town. Now there's a Lowe's, there's plazas there. I mean, it's Restaurant Row now. That's what they call it, Restaurant Row. We just talked about that the other day.
We just ate there last weekend at Texas Roadhouse.
Texas Roadhouse. But the Burger King there had a sign out front that read, and I quote, this was written on the sign at that time, America's most beautiful Burger King. Because at the time it was state of the art. I mean, it was clean. It just had all the fancy stuff. It wasn't like most of your Burger Kings. And at that time, according to everything I read in the news, in Naples, there were more millionaires per capita than any other U.S. city at that time.
I think that's still the case.
I don't know for sure. And again, I don't want to report fake news. So,
true.
So I can just go by that. So.
This is going to be part 1. So we'll figure that out and let our readers.
Yeah, our readers.
We'll let our listeners know in part 2.
She's going to type this out verbatim, and she's also going to have it in Braille. But anyway, so at Naples that time, I mean, it was the wealthy. We came down here in Naples. I mean, it was beautiful. I mean, there wasn't hardly anything. And in '87,
how much do you think the population's grown since then?
Well,
I think it's at least quadrupled.
Oh, easy. Well, in Naples, what the research, I think I wrote it down in here. According to my notes, I think there was it had grown to 20,000 people in Naples, and I mean Naples, I'm talking about sort of the city lying areas, Naples Park, East Naples.
The city of Naples versus...
Not Golden Gate City, because Golden Gate City at that time was still full, but not huge. So
that's where we lived.
Not sure if has anyone picked up on what we're going to talk about? Because I don't think we've mentioned it yet.
We haven't even mentioned it yet.
No, we haven't. I'm sure you'll get it in the title because we'll put it down there, but maybe we don't.
So we're going to talk about the Benson murders. And this
is a very explosive episode. Everyone tune in.
If you even just do a Google search on Benson murders, the amount of information that comes up, the amount of intrigue in this case, the amount of explosiveness, literally and figuratively, is astonishing. And like I said, I didn't even hear about this or know anything about it until I was a young adult. Maybe in my 20s is the first time I even heard of it.
Well, it's funny because there's a lot of people and some of the people on the podcast that either don't live here or that are new, because we've got new friends that have moved down here, I'm going to say within the last 10 years, and I've asked them about it.
They have no idea.
They have no idea. Yeah. So this is what makes this a really good case. Plus, there's tons of information and the one thing I do like about it is it's kind of a solved crime.
It is a solved crime.
It doesn't leave you hanging or twisting in the wind. It's not something still ongoing.
But it's a really interesting story.
Sad.
It's a very sad story, but interesting nonetheless. So let's introduce our characters here. First character we have is Margaret Benson. On July 9th of 1985, Margaret Benson was 63 years old. Described by neighbors as quiet and low-key and a, quote, really pleasant lady. Widow of Edward Benson, a chairman of the Lancaster Leaf Tobacco Company, who died in 1980 shortly after the couple moved to Naples from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. One thing I do want to clarify, and everybody I've asked about this, the first thing that comes to their mind was, oh yeah, the Benson and Hedges family. I've done extensive research on that particular scenario. They had nothing to do with Benson and Hedges. Benson and Hedges is owned by Philip Morris. Well, that was mistakenly reported.
Well, it was, but it was incorrect. And the reason is because it's actually, we'll talk about it, but Margaret Benson married Edward Benson, obviously, as we just talked about, the widow. But the Lancaster Leaf Tobacco Company imports and grows and sells cigar tobacco to cigar manufacturers. They have nothing to do with cigarettes or Benson and Hedges at all. Edward Benson came into the family after Margaret's father had created this and built this tobacco dynasty. But I just want to clarify that because some people do get that confused. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Well, Edward Benson left his wife and children an estate estimated at over $10 million. Now
remember this, $10 million in 1985.
Yeah, so...
We're talking a ton of money.
Yes. It's funny, I read some of the articles from the 80s, and they boasted about how Margaret Benson lived in a $500,000 house in Quail Creek.
Quail Creek.
And I'm thinking a $500,000 house now is 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,800 square feet.
With a pool and a screen cage. And maybe a 2-car garage.
Yeah. I mean, we are talking...
But in 1985... Oh, that's huge. You know, that's a lot of money in 1985.
You're right. And you have to keep remembering that as we go.
Yeah, as we do these cases and the cases that we do.
These older cases. When it comes to the money, it's...
Well, one thing that most people don't know is at the time in Quail Creek where this happened, there were only 50 homes in this development. Now there's a ton. I don't actually have the exact number, but now there's a lot of homes in Quail Creek. But what some people don't know, well, we'll get into it. Maybe it's lit. Maybe we will talk about it. But she owned this home and was having another house built, a bigger house built in Quail Creek at the time of.
Yeah, well, she had owned a $1 million home on Galleon Drive and wanted to redo it and renovate it, but the city of Naples wouldn't approve her permits. So she just said, well, screw you. And she moved into this $500,000 temporary home to stay while she was scouting out property to build her dream home.
This is on White Violet in Quail Creek, I believe.
Is that the road? I didn't know.
Yeah, White Violet.
So she was living in a temporary... You know how if you're like in the middle of moving, maybe you got to rent an apartment for a couple months just in the meantime? Well, instead of renting an apartment, they just bought a $500,000 home.
Yeah, that's how you roll.
No biggie.
Next character.
We have Scott Benson. Scott Benson was 21 years old. He was the adopted son of Margaret Benson. Described by those who knew him as a generous and genial rich kid who aspired to be a professional tennis player. Dated a beautiful blonde and enjoyed the fast life in both cars and boats. Though he reportedly told some friends he was a tennis pro, ranked 60th in the world, Benson is not rated by the Association of Tennis Professionals.
He was still taking lessons.
Aside from practicing his favorite sport for hours on end, Scott Benson tooled around town in one of his several sports cars, including a fire-engine Red Lotus, a Porsche 928, and a pair of Datsun 280Zs. Scott ran with a rough crowd and was known to get rough with both Margaret and Carol Lynn. We're going to talk about Carol Lynn next.
She's the daughter of Margaret and Edward Benson. And she
is the biological daughter. Now, Scott Benson was the adopted son. Carol Lynn was the biological daughter of Margaret Benson.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Is Carol Lynn Benson Kendall. That's her current name, I believe, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. She was a daughter of Carol Benson and the biological mother of Scott Benson. But that did not actually come out until people knew it. It was sort of the word.
It was a dirty family secret?
It was. And we'll get into some of more of that a little bit later. But that actually, she never admitted to that until the trial.
Yes, under oath, she finally admitted that she was the biological mother of Scott Benson. We're going to get into that.
She was just, the typical wealthy, very beautiful woman. She was the former runner-up for Miss Florida beauty pageant. And I think she did some beauty pageants also in Lancaster, and she was a winner. She actually won beauty pageants in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And we'll get into how she plays a part in this. And then the main character of the show...
Stephen Benson. Stephen Benson was the son of Margaret Benson.
He's a dick.
Biological son of Margaret Benson. He was the brother/uncle of Scott Benson, brother of Carol Benson, described as an improvident drifter whose business failures apparently led him to misappropriate some of his mother's fortune.
Misappropriate's a good word. How about steal that shit?
We'll get into that.
Okay, I'm sorry. One thing also is he was one of those guys that he had to start businesses and be the CEO. He couldn't just slowly grow his company. I mean, he just wanted to open the doors on a business and have it be a $1 million company.
Well, it never was.
Exactly.
He had several failed businesses.
Exactly. What I'm saying, that's how he wanted. He wanted to just step into the CEO spot. He wasn't the type of guy that wanted to build a company, unlike his father and his grandfather.
All right. Well, let's talk about the background here.
Let's talk about the grandfather.
Okay. In 1927, Harry Hitchcock founded the Lancaster Leaf Tobacco Company, which imported tobacco and resold it to its manufacturers. Like Ken said, it was not the Benson and Hedges tobacco. It was the Lancaster Leaf Tobacco Company. His company became very successful, and he and his wife had 2 children, Margaret and Janet.
One thing to know about Harry Hitchcock is he was a very religious man. He didn't really care about money. He wasn't the type of guy, he's not like the rest of the family, as we'll find out. He wasn't a materialistic guy. He was very religious. Money meant nothing to him, but what he wanted to do was just raise his family. And a lot of his money, as he went on, did go to the church that he went to in Pennsylvania.
I didn't know that.
Well, that's why we research different aspects, though.
Well, Margaret married Edward Benson, with whom she had 2 children, Carol Lynn and Stephen. Harry Hitchcock began to have health problems in the late 1950s, so Edward started to run the company for him. Now, Edward Benson is Harry Hitchcock's son-in-law.
Stephen and Carol's father.
Margaret's husband. The business became even more successful, and eventually both Harry Hitchcock and Edward Benson were making millions. The Bensons became what many would describe as new money, and the Benson children reportedly led a spoiled brat lifestyle. Now, that's where a lot of this stuff didn't come out. You know, the neighbors described Margaret Benson as a really pleasant lady, but it wasn't until at the trial or leading up to it when the truth about this family really started to come out. And one of those truths centered around Christmas Day 1963. Edward and Margaret Benson adopted a baby boy who they named Scott. Many who knew the family were curious about why Margaret Benson would suddenly adopt a baby after having 2 children of her own. And like we mentioned earlier, it would not come to light until 20 plus years later in a legal deposition of Carol Benson that Scott was actually Carol's biological son, and Margaret had adopted Scott to save the family the embarrassment, as Carol was an unwed teenager when she gave birth to Scott.
Yeah, and remember, even there, she was still doing pageants and things like that, so they didn't want to, that's that mark in the family, especially in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Back then, it was sort of still a small community. And one thing to know when they lived there and they were making all this money is Edward Benson's was very much unlike Harry Hitchcock, who didn't really care about money. Harry Hitchcock just kept putting the money in the bank, whereas Edward Benson, from what I've researched and found, and a couple of things I've seen, is the house that they had in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, had 14 karat gold faucets in the master bedroom and each kid's bathroom. So all their plumbing was 14 karat gold faucets in 1985. Though.
That's actually not uncommon. I remember one time my dad showing me, my dad's a plumber, been a plumber in this town for 40 plus years. And I remember when I was a kid, but he was showing me a 14 karat gold shower drain that he was installing in a house in Port Royal.
But that's what I'm saying is unlike Harry Hitchcock, he's the grandfather, he's the money man. I mean, it's without him, none of this happens. But he lived a very calm lifestyle. Of course, he had the stuff that he needed, but in Edward Benson, I don't want people to think that he was just this golden child, this great guy, then he passed away and the kids and the wife and everybody went crazy. He was kind of extravagant as well.
Yeah. Well, Edward Benson died in 1980 at the age of 60, shortly after the family moved to Naples, Florida. Now, not long after his mother moved to Naples, so did Stephen Benson. Stephen was a self-described executive who had been in and out of the family business with embarrassing quickness and a notable lack of success. Stephen even set up a tobacco company in direct competition with his family's business, but it fizzled out immediately. Stephen founded a series of loosely related businesses, most of which had the term Meridian in the title.
So I don't understand why that would be, but...
I don't either. I don't know what the significance of Meridian was.
I think he wanted to just have something of his own.
the most nearly successful being a burglar alarm security company. Apparently, he had used his mother's money on many occasions to bail out both himself and his business failures.
Well, one thing to know about that is his mother kind of forced herself into backing his company so she could be part of it because she really wanted to control him with the money. So once Edward passed away, she became a little bit different person when it came to the children.
I didn't know that.
She wanted to control the kids and the money. I mean, she controlled the money. She helped them all out, but they were all aware that it was mother's money, and she made them aware that, hey, you're doing this, but remember, I'm in charge. So it was, hey, you can do all this stuff, but the minute I don't like what's happening, I'll take it all away.
Well, by the mid-'80s, Margaret was coming to the conclusion that bankrolling Stephen was no longer a good idea. She ran up a tab of what her children owed her at the time. Carol Lynn owed her mother $118,563.33.
See, at 33 cents, folks, we're talking about a millionaire and worried about 33
And she's worried, yeah. Stephen owed his mother $268,163.89.
Yeah, and my comment, I'm not necessarily trying to say anything bad about Margaret, but it's one of those if you got to be careful of enabling your children all the time. Sometimes you got to make them suffer a little bit.
Yep. That's true. Now, in 1983, there was a fight between Scott and Margaret. Scott is the younger adopted son. Over the behavior of Scott's dog. She let the dog in the house, and it had wet on the expensive white carpet.
And that's really going to come into play later on in the trial.
Well, the fight turned violent, and Scott apparently grabbed Margaret and shook her. He told her that it might be her house, but it was his dog, and if he gave the dog the command, the dog would rip you to pieces. And I think we have a recording of that Margaret was actually recording her altercation with her son.
Yeah, I don't know if that's the exact one we've got, but yeah, let me just play that right now.
Well, here we go.
Not before she put his violent threats on tape.
Just because it's your house doesn't mean you do what you want with my dog. Can you understand that? See?
That's all there is? Oh.
Just get your hands off, and then it cut off.
See?
Well, the police were called, and Scott Benson was held for 5 days. However, she continued to pamper him.
Now, just so you're aware, he was actually held for 1 day, went to the court. The judge put him into a mental assistance facility, which I'm assuming is probably the same one we spoke about before.
The David Lawrence Center?
Probably, and they were doing evaluations and things on him at that time. So it wasn't that he was held in jail. He was actually held into a mental facility.
Well, according to an article in the Washington Post, Joyce Quinn, Margaret Benson's quiet and polite young secretary who'd lasted but 3 months in the job before realizing there had to be saner employment out there,
No shit.
testified that Margaret paid for everything for Scott: his cars, his van, his cigarette speedboat, his apartment and furniture, repairs, his tennis lessons, his clothes, and his gas credit cards.
Well, one thing I'll put on there is to give you an idea. They calculated just with his. We talked about earlier about what he actually owed. Some of that was the cars, but most of it was she wanted him to be a tennis professional. No,
she didn't. She didn't add up an account of what Scott owed. She only added up what Carol and Stephen owed.
Oh, that's right, because he was the baby. I forgot.
Yeah.
Well, they did calculate at some point. They calculated what they were spending each month on Scott between his tennis lessons, because she really wanted him to be a professional. She's the one who forced him to do the tennis lessons and pushed and pushed and pushed. And I believe it was Joyce Quinn that said that they averaged out that they were spending $10,000 a month on Scott for all of his stuff, everything that he needed.
Now, did that include his nitrous oxide deliveries?
The ones that were being delivered straight to the house, yes, because she paid for those.
Right, and I have that here, that Scott had canisters of nitrous oxide, or laughing gas, to which he was addicted.
Yeah, he had a bit of an addiction to that.
Delivered to the house on a monthly basis, and the bills were sent to and paid for by Margaret.
Now, you have to be really wealthy and know people to have nitrous oxide delivered to your house. Also, along with the nitrous oxide, he also ran with some pretty tough crowd, and he tried certain things as LSD, some cocaine, to where more on a street level, I mean, he was a consumer. You know, it wasn't like he was buying large quantities of it. He'd buy small quantities for partying. So he was a bit of a partier. So he did a lot of this. And, of course, in the 80s, cocaine was a pretty big thing. You know, stuff was coming into
apparently he did dabble in the dealing side of things, from what I found. And he was getting large quantities of drugs. I don't know if it was cocaine or what, but...
It was on a small amount.
Well, apparently he owed some drug dealers from Miami a whole lot of money.
A whole lot of money in the sense of what they would consider a lot of money. I mean, if I owed somebody $5,000, that's a lot of money. But to him, it wasn't that much money. I mean...
Well, whatever the case was, he did owe thousands of dollars to drug dealers from Miami. And that would come into play later, which we can talk about in part 2. But... he was possibly on the dealing side and not just a casual user of these drugs. So in 1985, Stephen, talking about Stephen now, started another company in Fort Myers, Florida, which is about 30 miles north of Naples, where he also bought a large home. Now, this new company, he cautioned his new employees not to let anyone in the offices of the Naples-based companies know the name of the new company or what they did.
Which I put some 2 and 2 together, and I think that's why he used the name Meridian in everything he did. So that way, because he tried so hard to get away from his mother. He wanted his mother's money, but he didn't want her to have control, because every company that he had, she had a controlling and an investment in it. So she sort of was... Because a lot of times she spent the money and she was able to do this.
Well, she bankrolled all of his...
Well, and she was on every single company title as a consultant, quote unquote, consultant. So she had a say in it. And I think that's one of the things that he wanted to do was get away from mom. He was trying to get out from under her thumb, because he was actually married one time. Currently, when all this transpired, he was married to his second wife. Now, his first wife... They were married for, I can't remember if it was like 7. They were together like 7 years, married 4 years. I don't remember the exact numbers. But, and you can research it or Google it if you choose. But they were married, and she left him because she was sick and tired of mom controlling the money and everything that they did. So with Margaret, after Edward passed, it got to be where she pretty much said, it's my way or the highway. Oh, you want my money? Well, then you're going to have to do it my way. If you don't like that, well, then too bad. And again, we're not trying to paint Margaret in a bad light, but unfortunately, that's just the type of person that she had become.
We're just telling the truth.
Exactly. We're just telling a story. Doesn't mean that what happened to her she deserved. It just means that this is just who she was. We're trying to report it so it's not fake news.
Well, this house in Fort Myers that Stephen bought, he made the down payment for the house with a blank check that Margaret had signed and left behind for household expenses while she was on a cruise.
A check for $50,000.
So...
For a $250,000 home.
Margaret began to become suspicious that Stephen was spending more than his means and using her money to bail himself out. Well, duh. In the spring and summer of 1985... she asked Wayne Kerr, a young lawyer from Philadelphia, to come down to Naples. She wanted an accounting and, if had be, a confrontation with Stephen.
Which, oddly enough, Stephen had recommended she call Wayne Kerr. So Stephen had recommended she contact him.
Really?
And have him come and talk. So she kind of put it to the wayside a little bit and then finally contacted him at a later date. But what Stephen didn't realize is Wayne Kerr was coming in as a, hey, this is what I do. I'm helping the person who's paying me, which is what transpired.
So there was even talk that Stephen might be cut out of his mother's will. Indeed, Margaret Benson did change her will, but in a terribly ironic touch, the only change was to cut out Wayne Kerr as an executor. So Why was Wayne Kerr the executor of her will if she barely knew him? Did he recommend Wayne Kerr, like, way before this, or?
No, he recommended Wayne Kerr to her, and then she called him, and I believe it was after another issue, because she had basically wanted an accountant to come in there. And what Wayne Kerr did is he came in, he looked at all of her, looked at everything and said, hey, look, here's the problem we're having. I've gone through everything here, and you're spending all this money on your children plus yourself. But what they did is they went through and he checked out all the funds and everything and told her, hey, look, here's the deal. You inherited $10 million, and in the last year, you've gone through $1.5 million between you and your children. At this rate, you're going to be broke in 7 years. And she freaked the gal.
Oh.
So, and that's where she's like, okay, wait a minute. Well, then she started making all kinds of changes.
Well, it would turn out that in her will, her 3 children were to get her estate all divided equally. So Stephen was never cut out of the will.
No, I don't think she was trying to get. I don't think she was angry enough at Stephen to do that. You know, I mean, she loved her children. The problem is she just enabled them for everything that they did.
Well, on July 8th, 1985, Margaret learned about Stephen's new house and business in Fort Myers. That day, she and Wayne Kerr drove to Fort Myers, and when she saw Stephen's new house and the new Datsun sports car parked in front, she was, quote-unquote, angry. One
of the reasons she was so angry is because she found out that he had written these checks. One was for $20,000 and one was for $50,000. Well, the $20,000 check was supposed to be for payroll because he explained to her, hey, look, Mom, I know you're on vacation, but I don't have enough money for payroll to pay the people that are working at the Meridian Security Company. But what he said was, I don't have the money to pay the people at Meridian, so I need you to leave some blank checks. Well, she just signed the checks and took off with Scott on her cruise because that was her baby. That was the apple of her eye, so to speak, which is actually testified as terminology in trial. So Stephen had used that. Well, when Wayne Kerr had explained to her this is the scenario, Stephen had said to her, well, I apologize, whatever, don't worry about it. I'm going to sell my car. And I'll give you, I'm gonna sell the car, or I've sold the car to put the money back in there. And then when she pulled up, she saw the brand new Datsun sitting there, and then that's when she was like, "Whoa, wait a minute, what's going on?"
So he didn't sell the car, or did he sell the car and buy a new one?
He didn't sell the car.
Oh,
the new Datsun that he had, he was supposed to sell to help pay for one of the checks that he wrote.
Okay.
And when they pulled up and saw that the car wasn't sold, they're like, "Whoa, wait a minute, what's going on here?" He said, Mom, I sold the car. Don't worry about it. I got it covered.
Okay.
And she pulled up and found the car and didn't see it.
Okay, so this was July 8th, 1985. Now, we're going to move into July 9th.
All right, everybody pay close attention because this gets really nasty.
On the morning of July 9th, 1985, Margaret, Scott, Carol Lynn, and Stephen, the whole family, were getting ready to go scout out property for Margaret to build her dream home. Like we said, she was temporarily living in a home, but searching for property so she could build this dream home.
Within Quail Creek.
Yes.
Yeah.
So before they left, Stephen offered to go pick up coffee and danishes from the shop and go around the corner. Stephen was gone for 70 minutes. Well, that's an hour and 10 minutes. He was gone.
One thing to take note is Stephen showed up in his work van, which he had a white van that he used for Meridian Securities. It was like a white work van. Right. He showed up that morning in that car. And then when he went to get donuts, he took the family Suburban.
Yeah.
And he took that to go get donuts and was gone for 70 minutes in the family Suburban.
No, when he returned home, they were getting ready to leave, and he was suggesting where his mother and siblings sit in the Chevy Suburban.
Now, here's a situation where Stephen would normally, anytime all the family was together, and in previous times, that Stephen would drive. He would drive, Mom would sit up front, and Carol and Scott would sit in the back seat. Anytime they went together as a family, this is what. But in this instance,
his mother was sitting up front, and his younger brother Scott was driving. Now, this is at Stephen's suggestion. His sister Carol was in the back seat. Now, before Stephen got in, he said he had to go get something from the house.
I need my tape measure. I forgot it.
Later, he'd tell investigators that he was running back in the house to get a tape measure.
Yep. So now he's got everybody placed in the car right where he wants them.
Between 9:17 and 9:20 a.m., and sometime after Benson left the Suburban to run back inside and get his tape measure, the vehicle exploded.
Now...
Real sound effect.
We don't have any cool sound effects, folks. This is a podcast. We don't get paid for it.
Maybe I can find one and put it in there.
Sound effects aren't free, folks. One thing to note is the first explosion, we'll get into the second in a minute, but the first explosion happened. Now, Margaret was in the passenger seat. Scott was in the driver's seat. Carol was attempting to get into the vehicle when the first explosion occurred.
Now, okay, so I heard something different, and I don't know which is the truth.
Well, let's discuss it.
I heard that Carol was in the vehicle, and she had her door open because the vehicle was not air conditioned. Again, this is 1985. There was no air conditioning in the Chevy Suburban, so she had her door open. Remember, it's July in South Florida. And when the first blast went off, Carol Lynn was able to hurl herself. She described it as she hurled herself out before the second explosion.
Okay, see, now what I had heard in the research I did, everything that I read said that she was getting into the car and the first explosion blew her out of the car.
Okay, well,
there's two conflicting ideas, so you can kind of go either way.
Either way.
Carol was blown out of the car.
Now, Margaret and Scott were also blown out of the car, but they were killed instantly. Carol, who I have here, had her car door open because the vehicle did not have air conditioning, was blown out of the vehicle but survived. Stephen, like we said, was inside the house when the bomb exploded and was not hurt. The family's attorney, Wayne Kerr, was also at the house at the time of the blast, and he was not hurt. Carol would later testify.
Well, one thing... I don't know if we're going to get into this as we progress, but one thing to note is Stephen had, in years prior, even when they were in Pennsylvania, had practiced in their basement, the family's basement. He was practicing. He built radio equipment, stereo equipment. He had done a lot of this electronics type stuff. And I don't know if we're going to get into that later or not. But there was one scenario that maybe we'll talk about the next time, sort of because this was something that was supposed to be at the trial that never made it. But he had actually practiced with explosive devices previously and prior to all of this occurring, and someone knows about it, but for some reason the attorney wasn't able to get that removed. But we'll get into that maybe in part 2.
Well, Carol would later testify, quote, "I was suddenly surrounded by this orange thing. I felt like I was being pressed back into the seat. I thought I was being electrocuted. This orange thing was all around me. It was like malevolent. A nearby golfer came to her aid after she was thrown from the vehicle. Moments later, now remember, she was thrown from the vehicle at the first blast. Moments later, a second bomb, this one planted in the rear of the vehicle. Now, the first bomb was planted in the center console, I believe. The second bomb was planted in the rear of the vehicle. It exploded. The golfer who had come over to help Carol lost a portion of his nose as parts of the second bomb went flying. While she was being helped by the golfer, Stephen stood and watched the carnage. Quote, "I couldn't understand why he wasn't coming over to help me," she testified. Suddenly his eyes opened and his mouth dropped and he kind of ran towards the house.
Because he's chicken shit. And I know when they interviewed one of actually there was a couple different golfers, and they didn't know what was going on. They thought that, wow, somebody just went to start their car and it completely exploded. You can find pictures online if you look it up and you Google.
I'll post the pictures on social media of the vehicle, because if you see this, oh my gosh.
Basically, there's nothing but a shell left. It's literally just like a shredded can. I mean, it's something. One guy on a documentary described it as taking an aluminum soda can and ripping it open and just letting it sit there. I mean, it gutted this entire car. So the bombs were pretty extensive, pretty nasty.
They were filled with nails and tacks. This was well. This was a heinous crime.
Yeah, at that time, really, this was probably the worst occurrence in Naples, Florida since Hurricane Donna.
Yeah.
So this was pretty nasty. It made international news, worldwide news. It was everywhere because obviously you've got a millionaire family, and at first, and we'll probably get into this in part 2, Stephen was not the prime suspect. They didn't know what was going on. So like we talked about, it's going to take a couple days before they finally sort of pinpoint Stephen down to this crime. And coming up with the trial and the arrest, I think we're gonna go ahead and stop there, but we will tell you that, no surprise, Stephen Benson is arrested for the murder and the bombing of his family, his entire family.
Yep. And I think we should stop there, but please tune in for part 2 because it gets interesting. It gets even more interesting, I think.
Yeah, the trial gets pretty interesting, and again, they bring in some different stuff, and you'll never guess. We're going to leave you in suspense who the defense attorney is. So I think that's going to be all for now on this case, and I think we kind of go through the rest of it a little later.
Yep.
And maybe some more information, maybe a little more background. So that's great. Anyway,
all right, folks.
So on a different note,
please like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, go to our website, paradiseafterdark.com. You can actually listen to all of our episodes on our website.
You can also listen to them and find them at Stitcher,
Podbean,
Podcast, Apple Podcast. We're not cool enough to be on YouTube just yet. We're getting there though.
Yeah, we're actually thinking about maybe getting going on YouTube, but we don't really know what the heck kind of videos we would post.
We can't do that because I have a face for radio.
If y'all have any suggestions, or if you have any tips on any cases, anything you'd like us to research and do an episode about, please reach out, paradiseafterdarkpodcast@gmail.com, or you can message us on Facebook.
Yeah, please do.
DM us on Instagram. We're so approachable. We are so reachable.
Yeah, so send us an email if you have a question.
Give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts.
Yeah, woo. Because what that does is that helps bring attention to our podcast and kind of brings people in, and more people will listen, and the more the people listen, the better we can get. And
we are about 150 downloads away from 2,000 downloads. Now, I think it was only maybe a month ago that we were super excited because we reached 1,000. And now it took us 3 or 4 months to reach 1,000, and now a month later we're almost to 2,000. I'm feeling really good about this.
And now we've got a new little spot. We're all set up in our new little studio, if you will. So it's the Paradise After Dark little room we have. It's candlelight. Just picture this: a candlelit room with chains, and I'm in the corner chained up because she doesn't let.
No, I told you we don't talk about that.
That's right. We can't talk about that anyway.
All right, everyone. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Please tune in to part 2 coming up in a week or so.
Hopefully less than a week. We should be good now.
Let's be real here. We have lives.
Well, we say that every time. We do. And we're doing the podcast, and we absolutely love it. It's something fun to do. But sometimes when you get stuck into research, you don't have enough time to get everything in, and you want to try to get everything in, which is why we have to. There's so much on this one, we have to split it in 2 pieces.
Oh my gosh, we have this one case we've been working on for months, and it's just like more and more stuff coming, and we're not ready. There's still more.
It's coming.
So.
And it's like it gets hyped up, and you're like, and then you're just like, man, I hope it's going to be good. But we've already done an interview. We've got another interview to do on that one. We're waiting for some information. We've actually applied for some information. We may not get it.
Yeah, we figured out how to do the Freedom of Information Act. Is that what it is?
Yeah,
to actually get the
So we're getting some information going. So we're trying, we're growing. So stick with us. We appreciate everybody that's...
Thank you for listening. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much for being part of it and helping us. Like I said, just try to bring more people to the table and bring some attention to us. We have a lot of fun doing this, and hopefully we'll see you back here at Paradise After Dark.
Paradise After Dark, out.
Peace.